Awesome. So some things before we begin. We do have a resource document that is available to you that will be shared in the chat momentarily. It has the presentation slides, if that's something that will be helping you throughout the webinar to help you look at those slides. We also have all of the links that we're going to be referencing and that are also shared on the slides as well. So you could find that in the chat. Thanks so much, Lo. And as you all know, the webinar is being recorded and it will be sent to you after the hour. And it'll also be included in that resource document, the webinar link. We have all of our webinars on our NDIA YouTube page. And we will have a Q&A segment at the end. So if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A chat. To find that, it'll be in the toolbar section at the bottom. There's going to be a chat. There's going to be 2 chat boxes that say Q&A. So if you have any questions, please pop them in there. All right, let's get started. So for today's agenda, we're going to start off by talking about NDIA, introducing who the National Digital Inclusion Alliance is, if you've never heard of us before. Then we're going to dive into definitions, and then straight away going into understanding the barriers within digital inclusion. And after that, we'll talk about some solutions to that. And we'll also introduce the digital navigator model, talk about digital inclusion coalitions, and also very importantly, we'll talk about policy. We'll also highlight some events coming up and then the Q&A at the end. All right, so here are our presenters for today. I will introduce myself. Hi, everybody. I'm Pamela, she, they. I am the Training and Community Engagement Manager with NDIA, and I will pass it over to Lo.
Hey y'all, I'm Lo Smith. My pronouns are they, them, and I'm a Senior Programs Manager with NDIA, and I will hand it off to Sion.
Hi everyone, I'm Sion Tesfaye. I'm a Research and Policy Manager at NDIA, pronouns she, her.
Lovely, lovely. So you'll hear from both of them later with their expertise, but for now you've got me. All right, so let's define what NDIA is. So NDIA stands for the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, and we advance digital equity by supporting community programs like yours and equipping policymakers to act. We are a nonprofit representing and serving more than 1,400 US affiliates, including 23 tribal entities and organizations in all 50 states, including the District of Columbia, American Samoa, Northern Mariana Islands, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the US Virgin Islands, for affordable broadband, access to devices, and digital skills training and support. Here at NDIA, we facilitate knowledge sharing forums, such as our monthly community calls that is happening this Friday. We also have working group meetings and our very popular NDIA community listserv. After learning from our community, we draw major themes of what we hear, and then we align our advocacy efforts with that. And speaking of our advocacy efforts, we do have a lot of resources that are free to you all. So go ahead and scan if that's going to be easy for you to scan the QR code. And if not, we'll also put our resources in the chat for you to check out. Again, all of them are free and accessible. All right, so let's get started with these definitions. So first off is digital equity. So it's why we're doing the work that we do, right? So that everybody in our community can get online and use the internet in the way that they want to, without having to worry about things like if their internet connection is stable, if they can afford next month's internet bill, they don't have to worry about the device, but the device that they're using is able to get connected to the internet, or that it's up to date, or that they have the skills necessary to navigate the World Wide Web safely, right? So with digital equity comes power for all of our community members to engage and participate and change our society. So it looks like a single mom having the digital skills to start an online business, or being able to study so that somebody can pass their US citizenship test, or people are able to go online and organize their community around a social issue. I'm sure we've all seen the different ways in which our communities have engaged with using the internet. And so this slide talks about why the word equity, right? So when we use the word equity, we're accurately acknowledging that there are systemic barriers that must be addressed when achieving equality for all communities and individuals. So the left image, it represents equal distribution of resources. So there's 6 books equally distributed amongst 3 different people. And as you can see, it doesn't really change their starting point. It doesn't make them it doesn't change their barriers in terms of how they can access that laptop, right? But on the equity side, on the right side, you see how the books, the resources are distributed in an equitable way so that everybody has that equal access to using that computer. So we do this by learning about the unique needs of our community members. So for example, as it comes to the digital inclusion practices, are there multilingual trainers, or are there trainers that come from shared lived experiences as a community that we're serving? For those who are specifically providing those digital skills training, is the location of the event or the training classes, are they accessible for the community that you're trying to serve, right? Is it in a location that they feel safe in? Is it in a location that they can easily access through public transportation? And also learning about the community's history can give you a huge insight as well, right? So for example, if there's a big refugee community, signing up for something that is free, a free program provided by the internet, if they came from, back home where there's civil unrest and they don't trust the government, that they might not be first in line to sign up for a free program like that, right? So understanding the unique needs of each community can help you understand what are the resources that you have and how you can adjust it to meet their needs. And then digital inclusion, right? It's those activities that are necessary to achieve digital equity. So it's things like having access to reliable and affordable high-speed internet, access to affordable and appropriate devices, and providing digital skills training and support. So it's the work that you are all doing, and we'll go into detail in the next few slides about what these activities look like specifically. And then the digital divide. So this is the issue, right? It's that gap between those who have affordable access, skills, and support to effectively engage online and those who do not. So the digital divide disproportionately affects those who are already impacted by oppressive systems like racism, classism, age discrimination, and much more. In fact, the Census Project blog shared a few months ago that the lack of broadband access in lower income communities was a big factor in the uneven 2020 census response throughout California. So we know that communities with a lower response rate are at a risk of being undercounted and at a risk of receiving less federal funding. So we're going to do a quick little Jamboard activity. NDIA, if you've been to our webinars, we love Jamboard. So for those who are new to Jamboard, it's essentially a virtual whiteboard where you can add sticky notes. So here are some instructions on how to do that. When you get into the Jamboard link, which is shared in the chat, on the module to the left, on the 4th icon down, if you click that, then you're able to add a post-it note, a sticky note. So go ahead and go over to the Jamboard. And if you're not able to do that, that's fine. You can still participate by putting your answer in the chat. But I want all of us to think about this question, and then you can answer it. What prevents people in your community from consistently connecting to the internet and using it effectively? I will give you all a moment to answer that while I share it on my screen. Oh my gosh, I am muted. Thank you, Diana. I was talking the whole time to myself. Okay, I'll repeat all of that. So I want to say thank you, Rio, for saying that in the chat, they had said not knowing about affordable internet options or just lacking digital infrastructure to use the internet, which is a really great point. So as great as our programs that exist out there, it's super important for outreach and engagement with those community members because they might not know that programs and subsidies out there exist, like the Affordable Connectivity Program, or community organizations that provide free digital inclusion training and things like that. Shout out to Diana, the MVP here. Lack of information, Audrey shares that, and I'm looking at the Jamboard. I see a lot of cost, and that's also shared in the chat as well. That cost is a huge barrier, whether it is getting a new device, whether it's the cost of setting up your internet service, right? Whether it's the router or whatever materials you need. And also, the device can be a huge barrier in terms of the affordability of that. I'm looking more. Skills, digital skills is also, if they don't have enough digital skills or the proper digital skills to navigate the internet the way that they'd like, that it will be a huge barrier as well. Fears about cybersecurity and threats like phishing. Yes, thank you for whoever said that. There's this huge fear and misunderstanding about the internet that, if you put your information out there that anybody can hack it. There are ways to protect yourself. Right? It's kind of like driving where, the risks will always be there, but there are ways that we can protect ourselves online. So for example, two-factor authentication, making sure that your password isn't easy, or like information like your birthday, putting your social security number information out there. There are ways that we can protect our identities. All right. Thank you all for participating. I'm going to go back to the slides. And we'll continue, but feel free to continue adding to the Jamboard. So let me get back to the slides. All right. So we're going to cover just some more key barriers to digital inclusion. So first up here is digital redlining. So digital redlining, that is the discrimination by internet service providers or ISPs in deployment, maintenance, upgrade, or delivery of services. And the markup, they published a tremendous piece of investigative journalism on digital redlining and found that in 15 cities, historically redlined areas disproportionately received slow internet speeds. And digital redlining is just one example of digital discrimination. So other examples of digital discrimination include discrimination in pricing. So for example, pricing structures that leave communities in lower income areas to pay higher prices for slower internet services. The performance of speed and reliability of services in one area is different than another. Also, another type of discrimination is customer service practices. So customer service reps treating people differently based on where they live or the price of the service that they're subscribed to. And so here are other key barriers that a lot of you addressed in the chat. So when it comes to broadband, of course, cost, the unaffordable factor in there, that could be expensive to start that service. The other barrier is that the service is unreliable. So the service either goes down when factors like the weather is added in. If you are in a housing authority or an apartment where the internet service provider, you're all having that in that same unit or in that same building, and everybody's using that. If they're working from home or studying remotely, then the reliability goes down because it just doesn't have enough bandwidth for that. And then we've also talked about digital redlining. Another barrier when it comes to devices is that, again, it's also unaffordable. And like what somebody had said in the chat, that there are programs that do offer affordable devices, but they might not be aware of that. Another one is that the service is outdated, the software is outdated. So prior to working with NDIA, I used to work at a domestic violence shelter. And then when the pandemic hit and everything went remote, we were seeing that impacting our clients a lot. If they had a device at home, it was not up to date, so they weren't able to attend their virtual court hearing because their laptop either didn't have a camera or it didn't have the software that was compatible with Zoom or compatible with whatever program that their legal advocate was requiring them to have. And also the device not meeting not matching the needs of the user. So for example, if somebody needs a certain software like Adobe or Microsoft Word, and they have Google Chrome, they're not compatible. So that's going to be very difficult if you spent a lot of money on a device and it just ends up not even working with what you need to do with the internet. And then of course, digital skills. So having the limited skills, on top of that, fear and shame. We see a lot of that from our community members. They're sharing that that's a big barrier when they're providing digital skills or even talking about, the benefits of going online, is that fear and shame of, I should know how to do XYZ online, but I don't. And that fear of that their information is going to be leaked out there. But skills, everybody's learning, right? Like, because technology is constantly improving and software is constantly being updated. So we're all learning together. And then also the trainings are inaccessible, whether it's because the person providing that training is not understanding the needs of the community that they're providing, or they just don't understand what that specific community needs. All right. So after covering the barriers, I'm going to pass it over to Lo to talk about the solution.
Thanks, Pamela. It's always fun to get to be the person who gets to talk about the solutions, because I think a lot of us here, we understand the barriers based on all the stuff that y'all shared on the Jamboards, the things that we run into every day in our lives. We're good at barriers, and Pamela organizes them in such a way that makes them seem like we actually can do things about it. And the great news is we can. We know at least 3 major solutions that we are currently working in to really try to defeat the digital divide and to promote digital inclusion. The first one is affordable and low-cost broadband. And particularly when we're popping forward in the slides. Can we go back 2 slides? This is what happens when we get excited. So when we're thinking about affordable and low-cost broadband, I want to highlight one piece of the terminology here. If y'all knew about digital inclusion back in the day, and by that I mean anywhere between 1 and 8 years ago, we used to just say affordable broadband. But now we say affordable and low cost, because we know that affordable is relative to everybody's needs and budgets, but low cost broadband is something we can all agree on. One of my best ways of comparing this is that we all know what a low cost cup of coffee is. If you're on the East Coast, or I guess now West Coasters have it too, Dunkin' Donuts. You can get a small coffee. A while ago, it's going to tell you when I first started in libraries, the Dunkin' Donuts across from my library sold 79-cent small coffees in a paper cup. Low cost coffee, we can all agree on it. But an affordable cup of coffee for all of us depends on what we need. Particularly, I know that Pamela loves a Starbucks mocha with whipped cream and at least like 1 extra shot of espresso. And on some days for us, we need to go get that when we're working together. And both of us are like, we can afford it. We are doing our best work. Other days, we just need to go hit Dunkin' Donuts together, get that black coffee into our systems and get moving. So that's where we think about those choices that we make regarding low cost versus affordable broadband. Now that I've explained those 2 pieces of the term, let's talk about broadband. Next slide. So broadband is the term for all of the internet. Sometimes people will say, well, we hear you talking about broadband, but we need to talk about Wi-Fi. Broadband is that backbone. That's the transmission of that information through that high-speed internet connection. How that gets to people, how that gets to all of our devices, that's all just icing on the cake. This is the actual thing that gets us our internet connection. Way back in 2015, and for context for everybody here, in 2015, Uptown Funk was the #1 song. So if you can take yourself back to where you were when you first heard Uptown Funk, that is when the FCC determined that the minimum standard broadband speeds should be 25 megabits per second for downloading and 3 megabits per second for uploading. I don't know about y'all, but I am a very different person than I was in 2015. I had a long braid. I was working as a librarian at Johns Hopkins University. There's a lot that's changed, but I am still dancing to Uptown Funk, but I am not agreeing with the fact that this is an appropriate minimum broadband speed. This is definitely something that harkens back to a time when we were not here on Zoom together today, that we were not spending so much of our time and energy working remotely, or even using many of the programs that we anticipate are just like a daily need for us. So luckily the FCC is looking into upping that speed, but I definitely recommend for all of y'all, if you're ever running into one of those moments that you're like, why is my Zoom cutting out? You can Google the word speed test and run a speed test to see, are you anywhere near 25 megabits per second for downloading and 3 megabits per second for uploading? And which direction have you gone in? All right, next slide. As I mentioned some speeds, I want to ask y'all about a trivia question, which is, can we all guess how much we will need in the way of download speeds if we were a family of 4? It is currently in this theoretical family of 4, me, Pamela, Sion, and my coworker, Abby. We're living in a house. We have 5 devices connected to the internet. Only 2 of us are working from home, because apparently the other 2 are out in the community. One of us is streaming high definition videos. What speed are we looking for download if we've got just the 4 of us there hanging out with 2 of us working? All right, I'm seeing some 100s in the chat. I've seen a few 100s in the chat. I think everybody these days is really beginning to agree that 100 is what we're looking for. So on the next slide, we'll get our big reveal. Y'all are correct. I want to highlight something that's different. When I've asked this question before, this is the first time I've gotten a unanimous vote for 100. I think that societally, we're really beginning to understand that high-speed internet is a demand for our lives. Previously, I've had people even vote A, B, C, D. It's been all over the place, but I think we're really beginning to feel that need. On the area of feeling that need, on the next slide, we can begin to think a little bit about broadband adoption, and that's just about daily access to the internet, but particularly daily access to the internet that isn't going to take us out of our homes and put us on a shared device. Really what folks need to be able to be quickly engaged and have that equitable access, we need to make sure that there are speeds, quality, and capacity to do that. One of my struggles recently, and I'm so sorry to all my coworkers who have had to engage with me with camera off on Zoom or heard me go, hold on, I'm going to run a speed test. My internet speeds at home have been low. I got an update from my internet service provider saying we're doing some network work. You will be experiencing lower speeds. It has been tough. I have not had the speed, capacity, or quality to perform my job, and my coworkers have felt that. However, I luckily do have the digital skills that I need to participate online, but not every community member does. And every time that we roll out a new piece of software or a new app, I have to gain those digital skills to make sure that I'm able to do my job. The most important thing for many folks is having that personal device on that secure, convenient network. That is making sure that you don't have to go to a McDonald's parking lot on a library laptop just to be able to make sure that you have filled out a form online, that you're able to engage if and when you want from home safely and securely on a device that really works for you. And on the next slide, when we're thinking about particularly those networks and those secure networks, we've seen that tribal sovereignty has a real opportunity for broadband. And with many folks who are in areas in tribal land where there's the option to own and operate internet infrastructure, it's really fantastic for maintaining that power and data within communities, bolstering the tribe's economic power, but also ensuring that that safe and secure connection is within a community that is able to maintain its own data and able to really have that opportunity to be self-contained. And I wouldn't be me if I didn't ask us another geographical question. So on the next slide, I've got another trivia question for all of y'all. Thinking back a couple of years ago, what city was ranked the best work from home city in 2021 by PC Mag? I think most of us were in a work from home city in 2021. I was out in the community doing digital inclusion work. So I was both working from home, but I was working from street corners. I was working from the city bus. We've got all over the place. We've got an A in the chat. We've got a lot of people voting D. We've got one person, a couple people differing ideas here. I do like to see that. But on our grand reveal, let's take a look at who we really voted. Well, not we, PC Mag decided. It was Chattanooga, Tennessee. So Chattanooga is known as the gig city because they rolled out citywide fiber in 2010. I don't know what the #1 song was for 2010, but I can tell you that that was a very long time ago for me, both as in my aesthetics and my music preferences. So think about how long ago that was and what truly a fantastic and first step that was in the whole world of digital inclusion. Back in 2020, they provided free high-speed Wi-Fi to all of the students who had free and reduced lunch throughout a connection on that citywide fiber. So there's so much cool stuff that Chattanooga, Tennessee is doing. We definitely recommend checking out some of their resources and information on it. And speaking of resources and information, on the next slide, I want to share with y'all some of our NDIA resources on the Affordable Connectivity Program. Don't worry, my colleague Ziana is going to explain that a little bit more, but we have some resources that we want to share with y'all on that. And on the next slide, again, we wouldn't be us without way too many resources for you. We have our free and low-cost internet plans webpage that is maintained by our staff who spend their time regularly communicating with ISPs all over the country to ensure that we have the most up-to-date information on ACP plans and low-cost plans with and without eligibility requirements to make sure that everybody is able to qualify. And a shout out to Diana in the chat who tells us that way back in 2010, the year that Chattanooga installed their citywide broadband fiber, the #1 song was TikTok by Kesha. So I will exclusively be using #1 songs to document how long it's been since some of these amazing digital inclusion initiatives have taken place. But first, I'm going to pass it back to Camilla to tell us about more solutions, because we love solutions here.
Thank you so much, Lo and Diana, for sharing that 2010, it was TikTok that dominated the charts. That's so far away, and now TikTok is referenced for something completely different than Kesha's top hit. So moving on, we're going to talk about affordable and appropriate devices as another solution to addressing digital inclusion. So here is a handy dandy chart. And this is actually taken from a more in-depth paper that looks at the different pros and cons of different devices. And that will be linked in the chat. It's also on the resource page. It's called Expanding Device Availability for Broadband, which we partnered with AARP as well as the Institute for Local Self-Reliance on there. And in that chart, we also talk about a desktop. So the pros and cons of a desktop. So we can look here. It's important when looking at devices, on top of them being affordable, is that appropriate factor, right? Because we all have different needs, and we want to make sure that we're matching our community members with the appropriate device that would get them to do what they need online. So with mobile phones, they are very great because they're portable, probably the most portable out of these three. And they also have a long battery life, but it does not replace a laptop. So if you're going to be working from home or taking classes from home and your only device is a smartphone, that's not going to be enough. I mean, imagine doing your job right now all through your smartphone. It's going to be, you're going to be dealing with a lot of barriers. I wouldn't be able to do this presentation if it was just all through my smartphone. But if your main focus is using apps and light internet browsing, then this would be the device. Next up is because they do have a lot of accessibility features in terms of having that touchscreen keyboard. There's that large display, an easy user interface, again, with that touchscreen. And it's also great for binging. So if your community member is looking for binging content like Netflix or YouTube or things like that, this is great for entertainment. However, the con is unless you're fancy and can afford that cellular plan on it, you're not able to make calls. And that's important for people to know in case they're thinking, oh, let me get the tablet because it's best of both worlds. I can make calls and still kind of use it with a laptop if I get, you know, a Bluetooth keyboard, but you do need that cellular plan on there. And also certain apps don't work for tablet And again, if this is going to be used for school or for work, certain software that your job might require or certain apps that you're required to do your job might not be compatible with a tablet. And then lastly is the laptop, the mighty laptop. So it's great, right, with huge, large storage, and it is mandatory for a lot of jobs and even if for schooling. However, there is a shorter battery life, and affordability wise, out of the three, they are most expensive. So when looking at a person's needs, it's worth exploring what they're wanting to get out of the internet and what they're hoping to do, and then go from there. And here is a great affiliate of ours, Tech Goes Home. So they provide digital skills training, computer and internet access to most people in addressing the digital divide throughout Eastern Massachusetts. So for each learner who completes a digital skills course, they get a Chromebook and 12 months of free internet service. So the picture on the right is a graduating class at a women's encouraging empowerment course. And that's them celebrating the fact that they finished their course and they have their device and 1 full year of free internet. And I just think that this picture really symbolizes, all of the benefits that can come with having digital skills and reaching digital inclusion and having affordable internet, because now, the world is kind of your oyster there, right? And so a resource that we want to highlight for you is our startup manual. This is great because it helps you with learning how to build out long-term sustainable digital inclusion programs. It also has like a checklist for things like if you're doing a digital skills training program, what to look out for, what specific questions to ask for, as well as success stories and lessons learned from other successful digital inclusion programs. All right, and then another part, another key solution here is digital skills training. So if folks have access to reliable internet and appropriate devices, that missing piece is those digital skills, right? Or else that device is just a expensive ornament. So the Essential Digital Skills Framework, it's a framework that we recommend when breaking down the building blocks of digital skills. So for example, some things that the Essential Framework covers is the ability to know the different controls on your device, right? So what do these different buttons do? Do you know how to turn your device on and off, how to increase the volume, decrease the volume? Do you know how to interact with your device's home screen or how to get back to it? Do you know how to connect your device to a safe and secure Wi-Fi network? Also, do you know how to do you have the ability to change and update your password, right? For those of us who have that skill, we know that it takes like less than 5 minutes. And for others, it can be an entire day, right? Because they have to sign into their email that the password is going to then go to, and then you have to redirect and all of that. So having those skills is crucial. And also the ability to open a browser and find and use and navigate the internet safely. All right, so one affiliate that we love to highlight is Digital Connect Initiative. So they're created by the Gila River Telecommunications, and they promote digital inclusion in the Gila River Indian community. They provide digital skills training such as digital skills focused on telehealth, assisting digital transformation for veterans and serving military, as well as having monthly digital skills training. And a resource that we love to highlight is actually written by our very wonderful Lo. So it's a blog post titled Planning to Build a New Digital Skills Curriculum. Read this first. And this resource is really great because it provides resources to develop a digital skills framework, as well as a list of free online digital skills programs that includes multilingual programs, special features, and facilitator support. All right, passing it back over to Lo to talk about digital navigators.
Thank you. Also, a quick plug for that last blog post that I did. I will be releasing a revised and updated version for this year soon, so keep an eye out for that. But now let's talk about digital navigators. On our next slide, it will tell you what digital navigators are. So I think a lot of us have heard the term, but digital navigators basically are folks who consistently provide holistic, individualized support through repeat interactions for community members seeking affordable broadband, appropriate devices, and digital skills training. It can seem a little bit big, but what it boils down to is that we designate community members to be trained and available to their community to provide outreach and to be connections between people and the technology. A really great example on the next slide are the Tribal Tech Warriors, or T3. It's a tribal-led program that specifically is focusing on workforce development, but it provides digital skills training and works with community members to build those digital skills, sometimes receiving a certificate, sometimes just working together. Some of the skills include basic computer skills. So all of that area from the digital skills frameworks of sitting next to somebody, helping them make sure that they can turn on their computer. Can they turn it off? Can they use Excel and PowerPoint, as well as getting folks connected to available internet and ensuring that community members are working with a device that really meets their needs. On the next slide, we've got more details on our Digital Navigator resources. We have our whole digital Navigator model, which is open and available for all folks to use. We have details on our skills assessment and some of the data collection that digital navigators do. We have a baseline digital navigator job description, as well as an intake form, an exit survey, and our whole digital navigator toolkit. So you too can really look into the future of having a digital navigator program. I am one of the folks who works on our digital navigator program, so I can also tell you that there will be more updates and more resources coming to this page in the future. And this is a shameless plug that when Pamela invites you to join our community, I think you need to, if you're interested in digital navigators, because that's how you're going to know the exact day, the exact moment that my team and I have updated this website, and when you can just log on and read through everything that we're providing you. I promise I'm not stealing your shameless plug to join the community, Pamela. You still get to take away that whole thing. But to really, really highlight the importance of those trained community members who are able to provide those digital skills resources, I'm going to have y'all do an activity because I love activities. So on the next page, we are going to take a look at our next activity, which is me asking you to create instructions on how to write an email. And we're going to use that same Jamboard that we had going on before. So I am going to have somebody drop a link in the chat, or I will drop it in the chat. And we are going to take a look at all of what we believe we may need to do in order to create and send an email, or create instructions to send an email. And I am going to give y'all a chance to get started on that Jamboard, and then I'm going to ask Pamela if we can take a look at it on our screen. But I know that everybody's probably going to need 1 or 2 seconds to really think about this before they start writing, but don't think too hard. Take no more than about 45 seconds to try to write that out. Beginning to see them arriving. We have some folks who are organizing things by number 1. I always love to see how people's brains work about how we give instructions. We have select an email product, sign into your operating system, hover over the email button on the top left corner of the screen, have an email account, check internet connectivity, open email account, open web browser, turn on computer device, ask if they have an email account. If they don't have an email account, create one. Have them log into their email if they have an email account. We've got, make sure they know the email address of the person they want to send it to. Aha! Open your preferred email account, hover over the email button, click the compose button, type the subject of the email message, open up the email app or go to an email domain, type the recipient's email addresses into the field. Is anyone else feeling a little overwhelmed right now? So keep these coming, but one of the reasons that we do this activity is really to demonstrate why having a digital navigator available to us is so critical. Because I think for many of us, just being presented with the need of how do I teach someone how to send an email? The first step for us always is to figure out where they're at. Do they need to learn how to turn their computer on first? Do they have an email address? With our digital navigators, they do a skills assessment prior to working with a community member, help to determine some goals, and then use their training and resources to really lead that community member down a successful path to that goal. So I love all of the great work that y'all shared with me. It's been fantastic to see how you think about writing an email. And I can definitely recommend some skills and resources if you'd like to provide tutorials to folks on how to write an email. But I also encourage you, think about what you would do if you truly sat down with someone who had no idea what to do, or the questions you might ask to get a better understanding of where somebody is in their skill set. But now I'm going to hand it back to Pamela to start talking a little bit more about the communities surrounding digital inclusion.
Awesome. Thanks, Lo. Thanks everybody for participating in that. It's one of our favorite activities. So with digital inclusion, you are not alone. There are other organizations, I'm sure in your area, that are helping address all the different aspects of digital inclusion while you're focusing on whether it's specifically focusing on digital skills or specifically focused on outreach and signing people up for the Affordable Connectivity Program. There are things like digital inclusion coalitions in which all different organizations in the community that have a goal towards providing or having their community reach digital equity, they all come together and they're all part of a coalition, right? So the role of a coalition and the benefits that it brings to a coalition members and its community is very many. So on top of raising awareness of digital inclusion, coalitions create a space for members to network with stakeholders and collaborate on data collection and hold joint events. And so here is a map. And we're currently working on updating this map of the different coalitions that have registered themselves with NDIA. So for example, those that are circled with red, they are local coalitions, and then the greens are statewide coalitions. So if you see something that's near you or in your area, definitely join, reach out to the Digital Inclusion Coalition near you and see how you can get involved. And here is an example of a digital inclusion coalition. It's the Bronx Digital Equity Coalition. So they're created during the pandemic by the Bronx Community Foundation, and they partnered with other digital equity organizations in the Bronx and distributed over 2,000 Chromebooks and Wi-Fi hotspots to their students at the beginning of the pandemic. So this is just an example of the great work that digital inclusion coalitions have and the impact that they can have in their community. And a resource that we want to highlight is the Coalition Guidebook. In it, you learn some great things about best practices from different coalitions, how coalitions are formed, and the type of structure that allows a coalition to adapt and also be long-lasting, and then also hearing from other successful coalitions as well throughout the country. So you're able to access that in the resource page. And next up, we have policy. So I'll pass it over to Sion to talk about policy.
Thanks, Pamela. I'm going to talk about a lot of the policy developments over the past few years that's going to support a lot of the work that Pamela and Lo have been talking about. So the Infrastructure Act, or IIJA, or the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, all the same thing. But what we were focused on in that act was all of the funds that are dedicated for broadband access and adoption. This is like a historic investment. We might not see this much money again, even though I hope that we do. Yeah, and they're excellent. So I'll go through each of them, and then for a few of them, I'll talk a little bit more in detail later on. So we have the Digital Equity Act, and this is really, a culmination of decades of grassroots efforts to make, digital equity a policy priority. And this funding is going to support states in building and implementing statewide digital equity plans. And I'll get to how all of that funding is divided in just a minute. But importantly, the Digital Equity Act really recognizes, like explicitly in the bill, that certain populations have been historically disadvantaged because of the digital divide. And it really actively works to include, people who are incarcerated, people who have lower incomes, older adults, people with language barriers, people who live in rural areas, veterans, a lot of really, really important focus areas for this funding to go towards. The Digital Equity Act also recognizes that, each member of these populations might be facing really unique barriers that need to be addressed. So things like broadband availability, affordability, touching on the need for devices and digital skills, all of these activities are going to be supported with this Digital Equity Act funding. The Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, going forward, I'll probably shorten to just BEAD. That's sort of the acronym. This is primarily funding for infrastructure to bring broadband to places that don't have it or have it at really poor speeds. So Lo talked about how antiquated sort of that 25 download, 3 megabits per second upload is, and how that's really insufficient for a household of 4 people. That's an example of, the kind of households that would be counted as underserved, right? So people who don't even have internet at all, or only have it maybe at 25.3 or anything really below that, 100 megabit per second download, 20 megabit per second upload is going to be considered underserved. So that's the funding that is really going towards infrastructure projects to reach underserved and unserved people. The Affordable Connectivity Program might be the program that you all have heard the most about. This is a program, that Congress really recognized as important. We had before it the emergency broadband benefit that really, really helped households during the pandemic. There was the recognition that, this affordability issue is kind of a chronic problem. We need like a longer term program to meet this affordability challenge. And so ACP was established. There is a funding challenge with that I'll also talk more about in just a minute. We have the Tribal Connectivity Program. So this is funding for tribal governments and organizations for broadband deployment and adoption project. So with this program, there's actually been a few rounds of funding for this program. But the most recent funding round, or the most recent notice of funding opportunity, includes eligible entities, tribal governments, tribal colleges and universities, Department of Hawaiian Homelands on behalf of the Native Hawaiian community, and the Alaska Native Corporation. So there's a lot of different eligible tribal organizations that can take advantage of this funding. The Middle Mile, there's $1 billion for that. And this is really another broadband deployment program to bring, robust high-speed internet to underserved areas. And then there is a section on digital discrimination. So this isn't like a grant-funded program, but it is a really important section that was included in the Infrastructure Act. And Congress is basically telling the FCC, listen, what we're seeing leads us to believe that there is a problem with some communities sort of being treated differently with respect to their ability to access broadband. And we need some rules to prevent that from happening going forward, because if we don't, that's really going to limit the success of all of the other things that we've been talking about in this 101. So the process to date has been, the FCC has been engaging in listening sessions, and they've been accepting public comment on what these rules should look like. And NDIA has weighed in on what we think the rules should include, and other public interest groups have as well. So they have until November to establish these rules. So we're going to see what these rules look like really soon. And you can read what we wrote. I don't have the link on me right now, but I can make sure that you have it by the end to see sort of where we weighed in. But the biggest, what we think is the most sort of consequential decision that's going to come out of this rulemaking process is really the FCC's framework for what the definition of digital discrimination should be, because that's one thing that has to be just sort of established in the rules. Right now, they don't have a concrete definition of what that is. So, the sort of debate is whether or not discrimination will be evaluated based on intent, or whether the focus will be on, evaluating what the impact of whatever deployment decision was made. And, our position is that really, really not relevant to focus on the intent or needing to rely on evidence that discrimination was intentional. We just need to look at the patterns of the outcomes of some of these decisions. And that's where the FCC's focus should be in creating these rules. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is how the funding is broken down for that first program I mentioned on the last slide. We have the state planning grant program. So right now, all states are in the process of developing digital equity plans. Hopefully some of you have heard about, your state's activity in developing the plans already, but if not, they do have to, complete their plans and make it available for public comment for a 30-day period. So if you haven't been in touch with your state's broadband office, now's a good time to do that. You want to make sure that you're aware when these plans become public so that you can weigh in on it. They are required to consider comments on it. So it's not just like this exercise, what you say and your input does matter in this process. Those plans are all going to be submitted to NTIA, by the end of this year. And then we're going to move into a phase where states will get funding to implement those programs. And they can use some of that funding to launch sort of statewide digital inclusion efforts based on what they've outlined in their plan, or they can use some of that money actually to sub-grant it out to different organizations. And then the competitive grant program is where like organizations throughout the state will be able to apply directly to NTIA for funding for digital inclusion activities. So in the competitive grant program, you're not going through the state to be a sub-awardee, you would go straight to NTIA. So that's the way the funding is broken down. And now I'm going to talk about kind of the timeline on when we can expect to see some of this funding roll out. Next slide. Okay, so I mentioned states are going to submit their digital equity plans to NTIA very late this fall. NTIA is going to review them, and then early spring 2024, we think, we will start to see funding opening up for the capacity grant program for states. Again, that's the money that's going to be used to help states implement their plan. And then they'll likely actually get that money sometime in the summer or the fall of next year. And then that last grant program I talked about, the competitive grant program, where some community-based organizations, for example, will be able to apply directly to NTIA for funding. We expect to see those applications open up sometime in the fall of next year. And then in the winter, somewhere around late winter next year or early 2025 is when you'll actually start to see the funding for the competitive grant program. An important note on the capacity grant program and the competitive grant program, NTIA is going to release what's called a notice of funding opportunity for those programs. And we're still waiting on them. So they're not out yet. But in those notices of funding opportunities, where you're going to see all the information you want to know about, am I eligible? What exactly am I allowed to use these funds for? What's the exact deadline, et cetera. So we're still waiting on that, but this is sort of the sequence of events as you can expect to see them. Next slide. Okay, so ACP, just a quick overview. This is a program administered by the Federal Communications Commission, but the organization that actually does the day-to-day process of things like reviewing applications, taking consumer questions, that's the Universal Service Administrative Company. You might see the acronym USAC. But the total allocated for this program is a little over $14 billion. We reached a huge milestone this week with 20 million households enrolled, which includes nearly 300,000 tribal households. And I'll talk now a little bit about just how that, yeah, that's great. Thanks, Lo. Next slide. Here's what that benefit looks like. So it's $30 a month per household off the monthly cost of internet service. That is $75 for households on tribal lands, and it includes a benefit of up to $100 off a device. And so this is also one benefit per household. Next slide. I'm realizing I have to sprint here. I didn't time myself correctly, but bear with me. And if you have questions that I don't get to, I promise you can email me and I will give you the details. But here's something I want to make sure I don't miss. We need more funding for ACP. ACP, that $14 billion, that was a lot of money, but we need more of it. So, the program is expected to run out of funding sometime in April, May of 2024. And so Congress is going to have to figure out this year, or we hope they figure out this year, how to keep that funding going at least through the end of 2024. So we need kind of like an immediate sort of stopgap to make sure that people who are already in the program don't lose their funding, don't lose that benefit. And then we can, in addition to that, we can have a conversation about what the long-term funding solution for this massive affordability need will look like. At the moment, we don't have a member of Congress that has introduced a bill with funding appropriated for ACP, but we're hoping that will change in the next few weeks so that, there's enough time for whatever negotiations that need to happen to make sure that that funding makes it into the end of the year spending bill. Next slide. So what can you do? For those of you who might be on the list already, I've talked a little bit about how much we believe in storytelling. And what we really need, members of Congress to understand is that if this program just goes away because there's no more funding, people are going to notice. It's not a trivial benefit. People's expenses or their budget will be disrupted if they're just all of a sudden not getting this benefit anymore. So we're really encouraging people to just share your story, right? Educating lawmakers on what this program means to you, on what this program has meant to your community, is a perfectly appropriate activity. It's just educating them on the impact of this program. So we're really encouraging people to reach out to their members of Congress and share just how important this program is. Next slide. Okay. Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, that's the one I said we sort of shortened to BEAD. This is a huge chunk of the funding, and it's really going to go to, like I mentioned, areas that are unserved or underserved, and some instances where there's a little bit of money left over after making sure that those areas in the state are covered. There might be an opportunity to use some of the leftover money for digital inclusion activities, but the Digital Equity Act funding, that is the real big one for digital inclusion activities that are not deployment related. But yeah, this is also a really important program, and what we're encouraging, the thinking around this is that you shouldn't be really thinking about infrastructure as entirely separate from the digital inclusion challenge. So that's the BEAD program. Anything else? What did I miss? Oh, State Digital Equity Plan Toolkit. Okay, so we shared this last year for states to just sort of get, just sort of have a roadmap, I guess, for how they should be thinking about developing their plans. So, right now we're actually in the process of developing another guide that's going to be a little more instructive on how to implement those plans. But if you're curious about what states were supposed to include in their state digital equity plan, I'd encourage you to just take a look at this. This toolkit was really just an effort to gather a lot of the best practices we've seen from you all doing great work and uplift that as things that states could look to in preparing their digital equity plans. And I know we're almost at time. Pamela, I will give it back to you. If you all have questions I can answer, I'm going to put my email in the chat for you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Sion. Just one thing I wanted to highlight is Digital Inclusion Week. So Digital Inclusion Week is an annual week of awareness, recognition, and celebration, and it's held on the first week of October. So this year, that's October 2nd to October 6th. And organizations and individuals across the country host special events and campaigns to promote and increase digital equity in their communities. So if you are hosting an event, if your organization is hosting a Digital Inclusion Week event, or if you are taking action that week, we want to know. So if you go ahead and visit the Digital Inclusion Week webpage, and you can register your event there, as well as fill out a form on how you're participating, we would love to know that. We're also going to be putting out toolkits from the National Planning Committee. And we also have a pre-event called Ask Us Anything that's starting next week. You can go ahead on the Digital Inclusion Week webpage to view more about that. And then lastly, we want to invite you all to join our community if you haven't done so already. We want to support your digital inclusion efforts by tapping into our community of over 1,400 affiliates. By joining, you get access to our monthly community call, which is upcoming this Friday. You also get subscription to our very popular community listserv, and you'll also receive monthly newsletters. Here is our contact information. If you have any questions for either of us, those who presented today, I want to answer one of the questions here, and I think Sion will be the perfect person to answer this one. It's more policy related. And if there's another question, feel free to pop it in the Q&A chat. But Jason asks, getting central or federal government to understand the importance and value of digital inclusion is difficult. What lessons do you think we, the international population, can learn from how change has been made in the US?
That's a really interesting question. Without knowing, I guess maybe I wouldn't want to say categorically, how, what precise activities that other countries should model, because I know that like system of government is different. But I think what's really been powerful is, the importance of creating like coalitions and networks, on the ground. And getting organized in their messaging. And that kind of organization, I think, makes it easier to talk to policymakers. And, NDIA's definition of digital equity was included in that huge infrastructure bill. And that came, that definition came from the community. And it was because we, organized a lot of people doing work in a lot of different places. And so, I think that creating those really powerful networks on the ground really kind of creates the foundation for being able to, take it all the way up to policymakers.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sion. Thank you, Jason. And I also encourage you to join our community and, share that question on our listserv. I'm sure other people can provide their feedback as well. All right, y'all. Thank you all for joining us in this 1 hour and 3 minute webinar. I will be sending over the recording to those who have registered, as well as putting it on the resource doc as well. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. If you have any questions on the Digital Navigator program, policy, joining our community, our team is here to help. All right. Thank you all, and wishing you all the best in your digital inclusion work. Bye.